Okay, this is The Grass is Greener on WXRW 104.1 FM in Milwaukee. I am the host of the program, Gary Grass. With me is my co-host, Babette.
Hi, and we're very pleased to have Mark Sleboda, International Relations and Security Analyst, who served in the U.S. Navy and nuclear engineering, and lectured at MGU. He's currently the host of the Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda at Boosty, and he'll have to tell us about Boosty because I'm not real aware of that. Welcome, Mark.
Babette, Gary, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on The Grass is Greener.
You flatter us way too much. So you want to talk about just a Ukraine update, or do we want to start immediately with the Middle East? Whatever's on your mind right now.
No, it's all you. I mean,
how about we start with Ukraine, because we were
please.
going to focus on Iran, but then the news came out that the U.S. was cutting off aid to Ukraine, and so what's going on with that?
Okay, so what we know so far, I think that would be to say that the U.S. has cut off aid to Ukraine would be a bit on the extreme side of what has happened.
That's how it's being put out in our news.
Yeah. Okay, so what the U.S. is actually doing, right, and this is depicted as if it's coming from the Pentagon, that they are undergoing a internal audit and assessment of the current state of the inventory of a number of weapons, and particularly missiles and munitions. And supposedly they have stopped supplying this particular list of missiles and munitions, not just to Ukraine, but to several other countries as well. But nowhere have I seen that they've ever provided the list of other countries that these missiles and munitions will not be sent to as well. I haven't found that yet. So take that for what it's worth.
That's why everyone is screaming, oh, they're abandoning Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a certain degree of truth in that. And then it is also, first of all, this is something that can be reversed at any moment, right? And this is being depicted as temporary, and it is being depicted as it is other military aid other than these particular missiles and munitions will be continued to be provided to Ukraine. And of course, military intelligence, which is a very important U.S. provision to the Kiev regime in Ukraine, and has been since the beginning of the conflict. That will all continue. So it's not being presented by the administration. Now, what missiles and munitions are now being suspended? That itself is interesting. The first one, and probably the most important one off the top of the bat, is the PAC-3 interceptor for the Patriot, right? The anti-missile, right? The air defense missile, if you will. And that is right now the Pentagon shortage of Patriot interceptors and their extremely low production rate by Raytheon of these interceptors and their inability to ramp it up is the U.S.'s military's Achilles heel across the world right now. And that has determined not only the state of U.S. involvement becoming uninvolvement in the conflict in Ukraine, but it was also instrumental, I believe, in the U.S. and Israel effectively tapping out of the conflict with Iran and asking, even demanding a ceasefire. because the Pentagon stocks of air defense interceptors are so low, and the Raytheon production is 600. They had hoped to ramp up to 600 a year. That is nothing, right? Because usually you fire 2 of these things at any target to have even a remote chance of bringing it down to begin with. It does 600 a year does not come even close to meeting the Kiev regime's needs. Maybe a month, 600, maybe a month for the Kiev regime, with the amount of missiles and drones that Russia is now firing. Maybe not even a month, maybe a week. That is, if you're firing
And then
2
you're
and
done
everything.
for the year.
Then you're done for the year. Never
Yeah,
mind what
and
also has to go.
and it wouldn't
defend.
cover 12 days of war with Iran.
Yeah, I mean, on top of that, defending Israel, defending all the U.S. military bases in the East, all in the Middle East during a conflict with Iran, all of the U.S.'s other global military needs, all of the other states in the world that require the Patriot, right? This is a huge Achilles heel of the U.S. right now, and I don't know how they're going to get out of it. They don't. It's not like they have another system. They have the THAAD system, right? Which is an anti-ballistic missile system, but they only have a few of these systems in existence. And they just blew through 15 to 20% by their own account of their inventory, which is to say all the missiles that have ever been made for the THAAD system, just in those 12 days defending Israel. And they make a dozen of these missiles a year. A dozen of the THAAD interceptors. So, yeah, there is good reason, right, to say we don't want to send any more of these to Ukraine, right? Right now, all the U.S. allies, like everyone wants Patriots sent to Ukraine, but no one is willing to send their own Patriots because everything that has been sent has been destroyed. The Patriot has really big performance issues, and this was already addressed in the Western media back when Saudi Arabia was defending their airfields and oil facilities from the Houthis, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones, when Saudi was at war with the Ansar Allah movement, the Houthis in Yemen, already a few years ago. They were already talking about the performance issues of the Patriot, how it wasn't performing as it should be, as it was hyped to be, and that there was already back then a shortage of interceptors for it, such that the U.S. had to broker a deal whereby other Middle East countries that use the Patriot sent their interceptors to Saudi Arabia on the promise that they would get them back from the U.S. at some time in the future. So even before the Russian intervention in the civil conflict in Ukraine in 2022, the U.S. was already short and facing a deficiency of these. Now, other things on that list include the 155 millimeter artillery rounds, which have been a crucial part of this conflict from the beginning, right? Artillery. Mm-hmm. It's less so. It's become more of, if the beginning it was an artillery war aided by drones, right? Now it is a drone war backed up by artillery. So a little bit less importance in the beginning, but still absolutely crucial. But also Hellfire missiles, which are an air-to-surface missile for the F-16s, the AIM missiles, the Stinger anti-tank weapons, the guided multiple launch rocket system missiles, whole range. So these are all crucial to this conflict. And the Kiev regime apparently was not informed about this beforehand. They found out from media reports.
Oh, wow.
And we are told that the person driving this is Elbridge Colby. Elbridge Colby is an undersecretary for defense. If you don't know him, he is one of the most notorious China hawks in the U.S. blob, right? The foreign policy elite. He has been for years. I mean, go to his Twitter X account and check him out. I mean, he has been critical of very vocally critical during the Biden administration of the conflict in Ukraine because he felt that all of these weapons were being wasted when they should have been sent to the Pacific to provoke a war with China off of their own coast in the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea, which he is one of those who sees it as the U.S.'s true adversary. And, it really comes down to, right, there's only three flavors of U.S. Official within the blob or politician, right? All three, right? All of these types, they only come in three types. Want war with Russia, China, and Iran as adversaries or holdouts against U.S.-led Western global hegemony. But the three different types prioritize those conflicts differently, right? You have your Iran first hawks, your China first hawks, and your Russia first hawks. And during the Biden administration, the Victoria Nuland Russia hawks within the blob dominated. Well, in the Trump administration, the Russia hawks are kind of being pushed into the back seats, and the China hawks and the Iran hawks are jockeying for position in Trump's ear right now. So Eldridge Colby seems to at least temporarily have won this round of bureaucratic games. And officially, the Pentagon is conducting an inventory and assessment. And that supposedly once this inventory and assessment is done, and if the Pentagon has enough supplies on hand, then there will be a resumption. But there's absolutely no word on when, if, it's basically, does Trump want it to restart or not?
Yeah.
So that seems to be the situation.
Yeah, some of what you said resonates as sort of a kind of an old story. When you talked about them, looking around for interceptors for Saudi Arabia. They were scavenging the world for tanks and shells because the production was just not where it needed to be. And Russia has just ramped up all these things. They started early ramping up, and they ramped up quickly, and they're just out producing anything. And so I think that's a great overlooked fact for a lot of people that favor this war, is just not realizing we don't have the stuff to give. It's just, it's not that, not a matter of our loyalty to Ukraine or, to the people that are running the country there. It's just limitations in our capacity.
It's absolute propagandistic denial, right? The U.S., much of the U.S., media, the blob, they are in literal denial about the overstretch, the imperial overreach that the U.S. is facing right now, with real limitations on their capabilities. This entire conflict, we've been fed nonsense, like complete propaganda in the Western media that Russia's running out of tanks, they're running out of military rations, they're running out of missiles, they're running out of drones, they're running out of this, they're running out of that.
They're going to be out of everything by September 2022.
Right? They have got nothing. They're fighting only with shovels, and they're running out of those. Right? This is the story that Americans and other Westerners have been fed for years, and it is complete propaganda. It is completely false.
You hear it in the media. You hear it from Congress members, and you'd think that they would be getting some intelligence so that they know better.
Yeah, you would think so, but this has been actually attested to, right, in the pages of the New York Times, in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, in the Washington Post, multiple times now, about how far behind in the type of military munitions and the gear needed for this type of land-centric war of attrition the U.S. is. But it's reported, and then it just slips away. It's not allowed to affect the narrative. But the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, has said it so many times over the past few months. Russia, right? That gas station masquerading as a country, Nigeria with snow, as was it John McCain famously said, is outproducing the Russian military industrial complex, is outproducing not just the United States, but all of NATO and the collective West's in military industrial capacity, in the crucial type of munitions and equipment needed for this conflict,
Well, yeah, I mean, even
outproducing all of them by 4 times. That is, Mark Root, he keeps saying it. Russia produces as much in 3 months as the entirety of the rest of NATO produces in a year.
I mean, you even
How can that be? How can that be? It's world shattering, right? Like paradigm shattering, because we've been fed so much jingoism about the superiority of the U.S. military, and you would assume the U.S. military industrial complex. But here's a truth. After the end of the Cold War and the U.S. shifted its military industrial complex for 2 purposes. One, to fight low intensity insurgency conflict in their war against terrorism, i.e., war against tribal Islam, across the Islamic world, and the shift to high-end, high-technology, expensive boondoggles like the littoral combat ship, like the F-35. The rest of
produced in Wisconsin, by the way.
Yeah.
We brought that boondoggle home.
I hope you enjoyed the pork. I heard the pork in Wisconsin is really good because that's all you're going to get from it. But this shift for these non-sexy, non-profitable items that you need for wars, like artillery shells, like air defense missiles, the U.S. military-industrial complex presented, we can produce on demand paradigm, right? And that was bought into. Meanwhile, Russia, after the end of the Cold War, they knew that their war, whatever war they ended up fighting, was always going to be a land conflict in Eurasia, right? That is what always. So all of the surge military industrial capacity, which was viewed as economically wasteful and done away with by the West, all of that surge capacity, Russia has not only always kept open, but has continually modernized, particularly over the last decade, so that when they needed to kick military industrial production into high gear, they were able to do so. Meanwhile, the Russian economy is able to continue as normal. It's a normal consumer economy. The Russian economy is growing faster than the U.S. for the last 3 years. And Russia is only spending somewhere between 6 and 9% of its GDP on the military, right? For the average Russian, the effect, this is not a wartime economy, right? Despite the military industrial complex in Russia kicking into high gear. This is like how much of an effect the Iraq war had on the lifestyles of most Americans. That's what it's like in Russia right now, which is to say really very little effect other than, you turn on the news and you hear about it. It's simply a result of a for-profit military system going up against a state interest orientated military system in the modern day between 2 pure competitors, and you see which one has done the planning and the preparation and is prepared for this conflict, and which countries right on the NATO side is not. This has been widely reported by not widely, I shouldn't say. It has been in detail reported by Alex Vershinin, a military officer who has written in RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, about the return of wars of military production. Recently, he's written a couple of articles for the Kinsey Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He has been absolutely seminal in reporting how the U.S. has lost this war and why they have lost it. And it is all about military industrial production.
I think so much of this is related to this sort of anachronism. We're sort of stuck in the past in terms of our view. We still think we have the industrial might and the military might that we had in World War II. We still think that Russia is the country that it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. A lot of this stuff is just like old data that keeps getting recycled, all zombie data.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. For the last 30 years, the U.S. doesn't produce anymore, right? Because of the global neoliberal financial and economic infrastructure, right, from Bretton Woods on up that the U.S. set up. All of the U.S. manufacturing and industrial capacity moved to Asia, where labor is cheaper, right, where regulations are left, such that the U.S. doesn't produce anything anymore. And there was a belief that the U.S. didn't need industrial production, that it could survive on finance and high-end service sector economy and design and everything else. And those brown, yellow, black people over there, they can do the manual labor of production. Well, that whole paradigm and the belief that you could sustain the national foundation, the strategic foundations of power behind it, have just come up and smashed into a brick wall. And that wall is the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, there's this chart that was going around a few months ago that traced like the supply chains for all the parts in our military stuff, and they all, everything had at least some component that was made in China that we could, and it's like, how can we go to war with China if they're making our military equipment, right? It's like, that has to get fixed somehow, right?
Never mind what they've invested in the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency and how much U.S. debt they own on top of it. Yeah, there's huge shortages. The recent Trump war of tariffs on China, the Pentagon almost immediately started screaming and saying, you don't understand. Everything that we do actually make ourselves requires these rare earth elements, right? And China is by far the world's biggest supplier of them because they're extremely refining intensive, right? I mean, they're not actually that rare. They're actually fairly common, but the process of refining them, right, of mining them, which is really more a process of just sludging, pit mining huge amounts of earth and destroying huge amounts of natural territory and processing soil, right? That's really what it is, and refining those tiny little things that you need out of it. It's incredibly environmentally destructive, by the way. But China clearly dominates the global market in that, and the Pentagon's like, we can't do this, right? We need access to these things on top of all of the actual parts that China makes for us anyway. We also need the raw natural components like lithium and others that are the biggest producers of, and that was something that was. There was an article about it in Politico, actually, but it wasn't allowed to reach the narrative, right? It wasn't allowed to penetrate the narrative. But that has been a huge part of what I believe is the Trump administration's walk back while proclaiming victory loudly, with no clothes on, screaming to the heavens, about, how I got a great deal with the Chinese and all of that. But more military industrial complex shortages, even something as simple as explosives, right? Like gunpowder, right? The U.S. has an incredible shortage of that, of explosive material.
Wouldn't have known it last night. We were listening to all kinds of boom, boom, boom here last night on July 4th.
I think
It
there's
sounds
probably
like a war.
different. I think there's probably different types of explosive use for that. But
Yeah.
I sympathize as a dog owner. I understand that the morning after these festivities is like post-traumatic stress disorder for those of us with dogs. And here it's not the 4th of July; it's New Year's is our big fireworks day, but it's the same kind of thing. So.
Yeah. No, it was really something in our neighborhood. Yeah, but you're right. They probably aren't using RDX in that stuff.
No, they are not.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if you actually wanted to spend the first half of the conversation talking about U.S. military industrial production, but that's kind of where the conversation went.
No, that's fine. It resonates with something. We were talking about the same topic with Larry Johnson a few weeks ago.
Maybe we could turn to Iran and
Absolutely.
the effects, the any influence that Russia had and the effects on Russia about that, and possibly a little bit on Azerbaijan.
Okay, well that's a whole can of worms there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll start with Iran then.
Yes. Let's start with Iran. If we get to Azerbaijan, then we do.
Okay, so tell us what happened there. I mean, it seems like it was a real humiliation for the U.S. and Israel for the reasons we were just discussing in terms of not having sufficient air defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that is the number one reason at the end of the day why Trump went from screaming about unconditional surrender and regime change in Iran to within 48 hours essentially begging for a ceasefire, right, and declaring peace. And yes, this total obliteration by the B2s that he's Trump, and don't you dare say otherwise, or I'll get you fired from your job, or whatever. This emperor with no clothes. We're asked to for the safe the sake of the US's international face, right? And Trump, of course, to pretend that there was real damage done to Iran's civilian nuclear enrichment facilities because they did not have a nuclear weapons program, as even U.S. intelligence and the International Atomic Energy Agency attested to. But Israel was not prepared for. Israel's never prepared for long wars, and they were not prepared for a long-range strike war of attrition with Iran. They were going to start. They were already starting to lose it. Right, things were shifting in Iran's favor by after probably the fourth or the fifth day. They had intended to conduct a decapitation strike, a series of assassinations and terrorism, because that's Mossad's hallmark. Despite the idea that of course we're the good guys, right? Because we do assassination and terrorism. Anyway, that did not get. I mean, it had some success, but obviously it did not bring down the Iranian government. In fact, the Iranian government has probably emerged with more popular support, a rally around the flag effect, than they had going into it. And facing shortages of air defense missiles, and increasingly the Israeli economy was suffering more than anything else. Their economy was essentially shut down for the course of those 12 days. And they lost, for instance, the oil refinery at Haifa that met most of, I say met, it used to meet most of Israel's energy, needs like gasoline and the like, and the port at Haifa, which was incredibly important for Israel's economic activity, and a whole host of other things, to say nothing of what we're now learning that Iran did to Israeli military bases.
Well, I mean, when it comes to ports, I mean, that's a real vulnerability for Israel.
It is.
Because it's only got a few ports, right? It's got one that's been basically shut down by Yemen for like a long time.
Yes.
and it had Haifa, and it had one other, and that one was shut down too.
Yeah. So huge economic damage. Now, it has to be said, of course, Israel was hurting Iran as well, because Iran, their own air defense network, was crashed on the first day, reportedly, with a successful Mossad-backed cyber attack, and then drone attacks from within the country by Mossad operatives. They had excellent Mossad did more damage, I believe, to Iran than the Israeli Air Force did with their airstrikes. But the Iranian air defense.
Was that similar to something that happened recently in Russia?
Yeah, I mean, there are similarities. That Operation Spiderweb, that they basically secreted drones inside of trucks, like cargo containers, on the backs of trucks, and then drove them and had all the facilities to launch them. This is something that I've actually done a whole In Focus episode on my own, on the future of container warfare, and how essentially every country in the world is preparing. Now the Pandora's box has finally been opened of what has been speculated about for a long time. And think about this. When any cargo container in the world, right, with thousands, tens of thousands of cargo containers moving in and out of major ports every day, and any one of them could be full of missiles or drones, right? Could be a secret weapons platform. That has huge security and economic implications. And now that Pandora's box has finally been opened. But it very similar to that was probably done in Iran, which raises a lot of questions, about Western Mossad, Western support for the Kiev regime in doing this. But we don't have a, shall we say, a hard connection on that yet. Right now, it's similar tactics, but the Iranian air defense was not well either. So it was basically like two mid-weight boxers with no defense game, just plowing into each other. And although Israel, with the sneak attack and the assassinations and everything, they got a few really good licks in, but the Iranian boxer, shall we say, recovered and looked to have far more endurance for the long term. And that's when Trump, tapped out, dropped some bombs, declared victory, and said it's over. And Iran, for their own reasons, they took enough damage. They had enough weaknesses, certainly identified. While they felt they could win a long war of attrition with Israel, when the U.S. got directly involved, and at what level, that's a whole nother, of course, can of worms that they did not want to open up at the current time. But while all of this was going on, now, there is, of course, Russia completely condemned the attacks by Israel and the U.S. as unprovoked, illegal acts of aggression, which, under international law, they completely were. Of course, that opens, this whole question of hypocrisy and Russia's intervention in Ukraine and everything like that. But I mean, that's what great powers do. Let's be honest, in realist terms about that. They scream at each other for doing the things they do. But in what wasn't being said publicly is that Russia, of course, benefited immensely from this conflict. For the first thing, of course, you all saw the price of oil go up. The price of oil and gas, it must be said. Well, that just provides more money for Russia's war coffers, right? And their economy in general. So anytime the price of energy goes up, Russia benefits. And if the Strait of Hormuz had actually been shut down, which evidently Trump, from some of his truths, do we actually have to call them truths because they're untrue?
No. Just still call them tweets.
Truths
Even
with
tweets aren't
quotes.
supposed to be tweets anymore. They're supposed to be
This
posts.
is true.
I still call them all tweets.
quote unquote truths that he was screaming about the price of oil. It's not clear who he was yelling at. You're playing into the enemy's hands, and he was very worried about the Strait of Hormuz because the price of oil just would have gone through the roof, which means the price of gasoline which have
Oh,
gone through the roof, which means
he's angry at
inflation. And
he's angry at everyone selling and buying
yeah,
oil that they follow the rules of the market. Like, why do they do
yes.
that?
Yeah, I can't imagine why they do that. It's all a conspiracy against Trump, quite obviously. You just don't want to let him win. But anyway, on top of that, the U.S. is burning through all of these air defense munitions that they already and all of these other things that could have been supplied to Ukraine, right? Or from a Chinese perspective, they just bought themselves more time to build up their own militaries, right? How long will the U.S. spend rearming Israel? Potential further conflicts with Iran down the line. The U.S. has real problems when they're trying to deal with Russia and China and Iran. You move
Well,
against one, and that provides benefits for the other two. It's a real problem geopolitically the U.S. is facing right now. But one thing that we found out only during the middle of this conflict, Putin talked about it to the press during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, is that the recent deepened, strengthened strategic partnership that Russia and Iran agreed to has no defensive clauses, has no military clauses whatsoever, which was a shock to me and most other analysts who assumed that Russia was probably already building Iran a integrated, interconnected, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare defense system, much like Russia has and has used to such great effect, during the last 3 years. But none of that is happening. In fact, we learned that Russia offered Iran a mutual defense pact, similar to what they signed with North Korea, which is to say, effectively, Article 5. And if Iran had signed this, there would have been no Israeli or U.S. attack, because that would have meant going to war with Russia. Right? It wouldn't have happened.
it
But
it seems like there's a recurring pattern where countries in the Middle East have an opportunity to get something really useful from Russia and they decline it. I mean, like, look at what happened in Syria, right? Russia
yes.
offered help, they said no, and they lost everything.
Okay, so there's two things here. First of all, we know that Iran, particularly the Iranian president Pezeshkian, who won election as a reformer, right, who wanted to improve relations with the West. Ha ha, naive, that you are. He worried that military aligning with Russia at a time when Russia was de facto at war with the U.S. and NATO in the conflict in Ukraine would ruin any chances that Iran had to improve relations with the U.S. and might, get this, even lead to direct conflict between Iran and the United States. Ha ha, you. But there is also a trust issue, because it was around, I don't remember the exact year, around 2010, Russia had actually signed a deal to deliver the S-300 air defense system to Iran. But that was at a time when Russia itself was flirting with the naively wanting to improve relations with the U.S. and the West. Medvedev was president. And this was at a time when sanctions were being put on Iran. And in order to please the U.S. and Israel, Russia held off on the delivery of those S-300s for years. And they agreed, along with China, to sanctions against Iran. So there are historical grounds for trust issues. And then if you can go back further, of course, during
I was
World War
expecting something way back.
you don't even have to go that far back. During World War II, the Soviet Union and Great Britain invaded Iran. because there were fears that Iran was going to join the Axis powers. So they came up with a deal quietly between the, hardly anyone knows anything about this, but yeah, they actually divvied up Iran, right? Remember the Tehran conference? Well, that was after, the British and the Soviets had, taken Iran out of the situation. I mean, there's other, and then you can go back to the Romanov period and a long history of conflicts. But to more recent days, you know, Iran has reasons, to question Russia. And they've been very sovereignty and independence focused since the Islamic Revolution, right? I mean, the Soviet Union was selling weapons to Iraq, just like the United States was, during the Cold War. So there is a lot of mistrust there.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it seems foolish to try to flirt with the United States in this current environment when there's this global realignment taking place. I mean,
yes.
Trying to achieve some sort of Swedish or Finnish style neutrality when Sweden and Finland have just given up on that completely and jumped into NATO just willy-nilly. It's like people are lining up in the world and their sides, and it's like you just can't play that middle like you used to be able to.
Absolutely. There's countries like India that continue to try to do that, and have varying degrees of success. But the current geopolitical context, I mean, you really have to abandon, some prior assumptions. And with a closing geopolitical window of opportunity for the West to act, while the U.S. is still, shall we say, first among great powers with military capacity, at least in terms of power projection and many other things, they need to take out their opponents now before changing economic winds leads to permanent, military changes in the balances of power. And Russia and China and Iran and other countries, if they want to see a multipolar world come into being and they must be the foundation of it. They have to get over their trust issues and hang with each other. Now that has already become a thing with Russia and China, right? That is the most important bilateral relationship in the world right now. But it needs to be extended to Iran. Iran needs to buy into it. Plus, there's a huge thing there, right? Russia and China don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, right? They both follow the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. What they are offering is a conventional deterrent in terms of air defense and military treaties and the like. But Iran would then have to give up on their own strategic deterrent and place their trust and their security in, their ostensible right now geopolitical allies, but something that's only forced into that position because the U.S. has been pressuring all three. It's a very hard trust gap to jump over. And so you can kind of see, I mean, it's easy from the outside, but when you're dealing with the national security of a country, these things come a bit harder. But ultimately, I believe that is what they should do. Whether that is what they will do, we don't know. There's two different paths. They could go after their own strategic deterrent. They could, race to develop a nuclear weapon now, again, on one hand, we see Libya and North Korea and Iraq that gave up, and how the U.S. then pounced on both of them. And on the other hand, we see Kim Jong-un, who raced to that nuclear weapon. And who talks about regime changing or attacking North Korea now? No one. Right? No one talks about that. And now, on top of that, North Korea actually has a mutual defense pact with Russia, and economic treaties with Russia and China. And I mean, Kim Jong-un, best Kim ever. I mean, he's secured the future of North Korea, in a way that none of his predecessors have. Of course, Iran has a completely very different geopolitical context to operate out of. But I believe
They
it
have
would be
different
to their
neighbors too.
yes, very different neighbors, very different neighborhood. I believe it would be to their benefit to take Russia and China up on their offers of military help, particularly with air defense and electronic warfare. But at the end of the day, we know that is a debate that is raging within the Iranian government. And the Iranian government is a very complex multi-faction, multi-institutional government. It's not like it's presented as some kind of theocracy ruled by a supreme leader who makes all the decisions. It's really not like that at all. There's a lot of different power factions negotiating a lot of things within the Iranian government, and some of them are in favor of military aligning with Russia, and some are not. And
yeah, no,
that is
the Western propaganda tends to emphasize whatever figure in the country
yes.
Is best for its propaganda. So
As a caricature, evil embodiment of
yeah, right.
the childish level of propaganda that is needed to bring
Yeah,
Americans to war in
yeah.
another country.
Yeah, everything was all about Ahmadinejad when he was president, and that now no one even knows the name of the Iranian president. They all talk
Oh,
about
I
the
do
supreme
because
leader.
Ahmadinejad was great. I mean, he was. I think he was a great Iranian leader. He was more socialist than he was anything else. So I had an affinity for that for Ahmadinejad. But yes, you're right. No, none of the young people probably know his name.
Well, no, I'm saying that no one knows the name of the current Iranian president. They all talk about the supreme
Oh,
leader now, right? It's like
Pezeshkian, I know because I have very negative feelings about him and his attempt to align his naive attempt to improve relations with the West. I think he has led his country into disaster. Not only that, but he has effectively abandoned the entire Shiite axis of resistance. When Israel in the last few years went after Hezbollah, when they went after the Houthis, when they went after Kataib Hezbollah, and Iran did. They had the political leader of Hamas assassinated in Tehran while attending
mhm.
the inauguration of Pezeshkian, and really did really nothing in response. Now Iran was at war with Israel for 12 days. And was there much of a peep from the prior axis of resistance, right? Iran's Shiite allies?
Yeah.
No, there wasn't. I mean, on part because they had been badly mauled by Israel. What was quite obvious now, strategic sequencing, leading up to going after Iran itself. But also, there had to be, why should we stick out our neck? What did Iran do for us? So I believe that Pezeshkian's pursuit of, to placate the U.S., to placate the West, and to try to, eventually abandon, the
Yeah. Yeah.
the
I mean,
negative relationship. It's disastrous for Iran. It has because they put their faith in the good intentions of the West, which just don't
I
exist.
mean, I've seen that story replayed for decades, over and over, all over the world, where people have put their faith in the United States and like trusted what they had to say, and it was like I can't think of a case where it actually really worked out for them.
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
I mean,
they
I'm sure you
trusted.
could find an occasional case, but I think it's the extreme in the mind. Just ask the Kurds. Just
Right,
ask the Kurds
right.
repeatedly.
I have to ask, well, two things. You can answer which one you want. Um, we were in a uh negotiations with Iran supposedly, and then there was this bombing of Iran. So much for negotiations. Can anyone ever trust us in negotiations again?
I wouldn't.
And and the other thing I would ask is some of those planes came flying out of Azerbaijan, and that surprised me. Did not know we had, base there or anything, or anyone had a base there. It was surprising.
Okay, so the first one, no one can trust. I mean, no one can should trust the United States in negotiations to begin with, but certainly not Trump. I mean, negotiations. Trump's idea of negotiations is, mafia style. That's his art of the deal, right? The New York mafia, right? You either agree to everything I demand, or my friend comes in and breaks your leg and we burn down your cousin's house. I mean, that's his art of the deal. That's the way he does negotiations.
Yeah, I wonder. There's been a couple of occasions we've invited someone to a peace conference and just assassinated them on the way there.
We're there. Yeah, that was Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, the head of the IRGC, who had a bright political future. He might have been president if he hadn't been assassinated. So yes,
I haven't seen it so blatant since Sandino in Nicaragua.
Yes, that is another forgotten moment in history that people should not forget. Should not forget. So no, I think that's first of all. I mean, if it wasn't already self-evident to the Kremlin, it should become clear that you can't trust any diplomatic relationship, not only with any U.S. government, particularly with this U.S. government. With Azerbaijan, actually that didn't surprise me at all. So you'll remember. So Azerbaijan, right? Small country in the South Caucasus, squeezed between the Caspian and the Black Seas, with their hated rival Armenia, right? Armenia is an Orthodox Christian country, and Azerbaijan is a Muslim country. And actually, there's a history of war in this region that goes back to the Roman period, between the Persian and the Roman Empire, and I could draw a chain that is the same thing all the way up through. But anyway, Azerbaijan just won a war against Armenia, quite handily, because they are an oil and natural gas rich country. Armenia is not, and they spent the last decade or so building up a moderately powerful military on the backs of that. Plus, they are firmly allied with Turkey and Israel. Israel provided a great deal of weapons and military intelligence, as of course did Turkey, during that war with Armenia that Azerbaijan succeeded in. And part of what Israel asked in response is intelligence bases to use against Iran, but that has obviously turned into outright use of air bases, from which, yes, it appears that either aircraft or heavy strike drones, or both, were launched and kind of, shall we say, attacked Iran out of their vulnerable northwest over the course of this conflict. And Azerbaijan is also in a very big spat of geopolitical and political worsening relations with Russia right now as well, over ostensibly issues of narcotics, Azerbaijani organized crime network that was broken up. But at the end of it, Azerbaijan has aligned itself geopolitically with Turkey, and also to a lesser extent with Israel, and that is leading into conflict. And there is actually a lot of talk right now that Azerbaijan is kind of becoming a second front against Russia in this conflict. They're threatening to. They are supplying weapons to the Kiev regime in Ukraine, and they're creating all sorts of problems in Russia's, shall we say, soft underbelly. And what was once hoped, that the West hoped that Georgia would fulfill that role. Yeah, it's not quite the same thing, because I don't see the U.S.'s hand here. It's more Turkey's hand. This is Erdogan. But Erdogan just won a huge victory over his ostensible Russian and Iranian allies by overthrowing the Syrian government and putting Al-Qaeda in its place. Al-Qaeda / the Islamic State, Giuliani headed them both at one point in time in Syria. So this is Turkey. Turkey has big geopolitical dreams of Ottoman Empire and expansion into Central Asia, and Azerbaijan has become linked at the hip with them. So this game is just starting.
Yeah, I mean, you see some repeated themes there. I mean, Turkey has been a very untrustworthy negotiator with Russia. You saw
with the U.S., with everyone.
Well, I know. I mean, yeah, Turkey is very mercurial. But especially just thinking about the the Azov combatants that were not supposed to be returned, that were returned by Turkey after all, and and another theme that's repeating here is like when Russia offers you some help. I mean, Russia was offering things to Armenia during its conflict with Azerbaijan, and they were just foolishly, I think, by the government in Yerevan, just thrown away.
That's because they had a pro-Western president in Armenia who wanted to improve relations with the West and actually wanted to get rid of Nagorno-Karabakh because he saw it as a political and geopolitical weight holding Armenia back from improving relations with the West. But that's Pashinyan is a whole other story.
Pro-Western president is also a recurring theme or recurring.
Yes,
it spells your doom.
It does in certain neighborhoods of the world. That is unquestionable. So, yeah, the South Caucasus has been a very interesting place over the last few years. We just saw Georgia, the Georgian government, throw off another U.S. color, Western European, also a color revolution attempt in that country because they wanted Georgia. The Georgian prime minister said outright, the West wanted us to open a conflict with Russia and to just hold out. And we said, no, we're not doing that. We're not going down that road again. We don't like Russia. We don't have great relations with Russia, but we don't want to go to war with them either. In fact, they're our number one economic partner, whether we like it or not, simply geography, right? They did not follow the path to national
Taiwan doesn't
suicide.
want to go to war with China because it's 90% of its trade.
I would say the majority of Taiwanese do. You would be surprised how many Taiwanese, though, a 30% minority do want to go to war with China. No matter, you'll always find that 30%, it seems, that are suicidal in that regard.
Well, we are running out of time here, so last words.
I will use it as you suggested at the beginning to plug shamelessly my own page. You can follow me on the Realpolitik on Boosty. That's BOOSTY. It is like Patreon, except it is sanctions proof. You can actually support me there, and I can actually benefit from that. And I have lots of 3 things a week of exclusive content shows. We have a community Discord channel that you'll get access to where we discuss lots of things, and we have voice chat, of course, and all the other things that Discord can afford. So a nice little community of geopolitically like-minded realists and other freaks out there.
All right. Well, thank you. It's been extremely informative. I'm always great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me. It is always a pleasure, and I look forward to talking to both of you again sometime, hopefully soon.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you. Right, bye-bye.
Bye.